paragraph you peel. Point, evidence, explain, link back. Really crucial. Okay, so how do I structure my answer? So I'm going to go through a bit of the planning behind my answer right now. So German occupation in the Second World War was in general far harsher in Eastern Europe, Poland, than in Western Europe, the Netherlands. Okay, I'm saying I strongly agree because I do agree that it was far harsher in Poland. And these are my reasons. I've got 3 points to back up why it's far harsher and 1 point to show the other side of the argument. Okay, that actually it was still harsh in the Netherlands. So my first point is the removal of Polish culture and education. And then I've just made some points underneath here as if the evidence that I'm going to use. So, as we know, the Nazis invaded Poland and they removed education by 1940. They changed the name and their identity as a country, changing it from Poland to the general government. And 30,000 most talented were killed and murdered. So they got rid of essentially their main culture, their identity of who they are, and their education systems. This affected all ages. And that's what I'm going to write about in my first point. And then we move on to my second point, the removal of Polish people and labour camps. So the first was the removal of culture. Another reason why it was harsh is because they removed people. They literally killed them, put them in labour camps. So they saw them as racially inferior, Untermensch. 1.9 million non-Jewish citizens were sent to concentration camps. Polish were forced to wear a P on their arm. As we know, Jewish people had to wear a star, but even the Polish were singled out and humiliated. And a staggering 3 million Jews were killed, which is half of the 6 million that were killed by the Nazis. This is really significant. This shows that it was incredibly harsh times for everyone in Poland, because every citizen was seen as Untermensch, which means less, inferior to the Germans. So I've made 2 really solid paragraphs there with lots of evidence that I'm going to be able to use and write up. You can make a plan if it helps you before your exam, but just be aware of the time. So if you need to jot this down before you start writing to help with your structure, you can do that. So point 3, which is to prove that it's far harsher, which is agreeing with the statement, is that the treatment of people in the Netherlands was fairer. So if you think at the beginning when they invaded the Netherlands and occupied the Netherlands, they didn't really change very much. They let them continue as they were. So civil servants were able to carry on working, education carried on, all Dutch were treated as racially equal, and that's a really important point. There's a very stark contrast between the Polish and the Dutch because the Dutch were seen as equal to Germans. Okay, racially equal. So the treatment was fairer and less harsh at the beginning. And this is my counter argument here. This is where I disagree with the statement. Increase of intimidation and violence in the Netherlands. By 1943, so after a few years of them occupying, the treatment changed. The Nazis were fed up of trying to convince the Dutch, trying to get them on side, and in the end they turned to violence and intimidation with them also. They killed 107,000 Jews, were sent to concentration camps and death camps. 300,000 ex-soldiers were forced to work in Germany to help with the labour force, so everyone was affected in Netherlands in the end. However, I move on to my clinching argument overall. All Polish were affected. So the reason why I think I agree with the statement is all Polish people were affected because they were all seen as Untermensch. Poland faced harsher treatment from the start, and more Polish were killed or faced harsher treatment due to being Untermensch. And that's my overall clinching argument, that yes, it was harsh in the Netherlands by 1943, however, they didn't suffer to the extent, you could argue, of those Polish living in Poland. Okay, so I've put some sentence starters on for you here because I know some of you struggled to make a start. So using things like firstly and secondly and thirdly in your response is good. As a result of, therefore is a really key sentence stem to use at the end of each paragraph. And then as you move on to conclusion, in conclusion, to conclude, returning to my initial point. So I'll leave them on there for you. They're worth reading over and learning. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at what does a good answer look like. So I'm just going to quickly go through this and then you can read it in more detail in your own time. So I'm just going to go through the introduction, a paragraph, not all of them, and then a conclusion. So my introduction is, I strongly agree with this statement. Whilst treatment in all Nazi-occupied territories was harsh and unjust to an extent, far more measures were taken whilst occupying Eastern European countries. One major example of this would be the Nazi occupation of Poland. Firstly, the Nazis were far harsher in Poland than the Netherlands, because as soon as they occupied the country, they immediately attempted to completely remove Polish culture. The Nazis invaded Poland in September 1939, and by October 1939, Poland no longer existed as a country. Germany needed Lebensraum, meaning more land, and were determined to remove Polish culture and take back the land, incorporating it into Germany. So here I've made a point, I've got lots of evidence in here, and the evidence continues. Poland no longer existed. Instead, the region was split into different regions and incorporated into Germany. Another harsh act against the Polish people was in 1940 when they closed schools, universities, and other forms of education. Alongside this, around 30,000 of the most talented Polish citizens were arrested, tortured, and murdered, and 500 ethnic Germans settled in their place. Okay, so as you can see, I planned out this paragraph and I went through that a minute ago. I said I was going to talk about the taking over of the country, the removal of culture. I've got lots of facts and figures in here to back my point up. And here I go on to say, as a consequence, the Nazis successfully removed the Polish culture and impacted all ages of life. This complete removal of culture evidences that the treatment in the East was in fact very harsh. So I'm going back to my point. Okay, so I go back to my point, I make my second point, my third point, this is my contrasting argument, and then finally the conclusion, which is the key point, the clinching argument. In conclusion, I strongly believe that the treatment in the East, Poland, was overall far harsher than in the West, the Netherlands. Polish people faced abuse from the moment the German people occupied their country. Their identity as a country was removed, and so too their culture as a whole. All the citizens were viewed as Untermensch, and this led to a significant number of deaths, including 3 million Jews, which is half of those killed by the Nazis. Although the treatment of the Dutch became violent over time and many too lost their lives, it cannot be denied that life under Nazi rule in Poland was on the whole far harsher and it affected more of the population. So, yes, the Netherlands faced harsh treatment, but my clinching argument here is that it affected more of the population, that more Jewish people were killed in Poland, that they removed the whole of their culture. Okay, compared to the Netherlands, which it didn't happen to the extent of, so they didn't completely remove all their culture. Yes, they killed people, not the same amount. Okay, it didn't affect necessarily absolutely everybody to the extent it did in Poland. That's my clinching argument, and that argument is sustained throughout my response. Okay, now I really recommend you go through this and you read it. Okay, you read how it's structured, you look at the comments that are included and the historical knowledge. It will be really helpful for your exam. Okay, now it's your turn. So what I want you to do is I've included several different examples of a how far do you agree question. Okay, and what I would like you to do is choose one, have a go at planning and writing it up. So plan it first like I did, write it up. If you want to send me it this weekend or before Tuesday, I will do my very best to mark it and give you some feedback. But it's really important now that you revise, that you go through these videos, go through the 7 marker video, go through the 15 marker video, and prepare for next week. Okay, you've done absolutely brilliantly this last expedition. You've worked so hard on the Nazis, so now it's time to turn that hard work into a really great response on Tuesday. So if you need any other help, just email me and I will get back to you straight away. Okay, good luck.